What's up, my fellow Shield Brothers? Shield Brother 6 here with my first alternate history Mondays, which I'm going to be calling What If Mondays. So today on this Monday, we're going to be talking about what you might have guessed from my teaser tweet I sent out. What if the North Sea Empire didn't dissolve after Canute's death? So let's get started. You might remember Canute the Great and the North Sea Empire from my second or third video I ever did. So let's get started for today. So, let's talk about what the North Sea Empire is, just to refresh real quick. So, the Danish North Sea Empire, also known as the Anglo-Scandinavian Empire, was a domain ruled by Canute the Great. As King of England, Denmark, Norway, and parts of what is now known as Sweden between 1016 and 1035. In this map down here below, you can see the red, which was the direct rule of Canute the Great, the orange, which was his vassals, and the yellow, which was his political and economic and military allies. So you can see how there's this large chunk of Northern Europe being controlled by the North Sea Empire. So let's see what happened in our timeline that caused the dissolving of this North Sea Empire. Well, in our timeline there was a collapse, and you can see that in the top left map where it was split into three. It was split into Denmark, Norway, and England. But our timeline collapsed. The North Sea Empire collapsed immediately once Canute the Great died in 1035. In fact, in Norway it had already been collapsing. By the winter of 1033, Svein and Alguthu were so unpopular, who were ruling in Canute's stead, that they were forced to leave Trondheim. In 1034, the leader of the army that had rebuffed and killed King Olaf at Stiklestad went together with one of the king's loyal followers to bring his young son Magnus back from Gardariki to rule. And in autumn of 1035, a few weeks before Canute's death, Svein and his mother had to flee the country altogether and go back to Denmark. So, things were falling apart for for Canute. Canute had had his army kill King Olaf, who had been king of, I believe, Norway at the time, and they had put Canute on the throne instead. But at this decline in his popularity, the army went back and got the son of King Olaf, who they had just killed, and put him on the throne instead of Canute. So you can see how in Norway it was quickly falling apart in 1033 already, in 1034. So let's see what happened with our trouble in Denmark at our timeline collapse. So trouble in Denmark. In Denmark, Harthacnut, who was his heir, was already ruling as king. But he was unable to leave for 3 years because there was the threat that Magnus of Norway would come and invade to exact revenge for his father Olaf's death. In the meantime, however, the English nobles divided between him and Canute's younger son, his brother, Alfgud, Harefoot, decided to compromise by having Harold rule as regent, and by the end of 1037, Algifu had persuaded the most important of the nobles to swear allegiance to Harold. So, he was firmly unconcerned as Harold I, and Harthacnut's own mother, Queen Emma, had been forced to take refuge in Flanders and run. So Harthacnut prepared an invasion fleet to wrest England away from his half-brother, but the latter died in 1040 before it could be used. So Harthacnut then became King of England, reuniting it with Denmark, while there was a very unsteady reconnection. He had generally made a very bad impression with a lot of butchery as king, and he died suddenly, believed by betrayal, in June 1042, as he stood with his drink at a wedding feast, and he died with him the North Sea Empire. So that's how in our timeline the North Sea Empire collapsed. But what if that didn't happen? What if Edward the Confessor, who had been a very troublesome thorn, died before Harthacnut did? And Edward the Confessor, therefore, would be no House of Wessex. There would be no members of House of Wessex nearer than Hungary, which was way over in the middle of Europe. So, therefore, the throne would go to another Dane by default, and maybe even Svein Eriksson. So, this would therefore be building connections and possibilities for union, as well as stabilizing the North Sea Empire. Then that's where we're going to pick this up. So, with this connection, we go into expansion, because we solidified our empire, so therefore the empire would grab Ireland due to the large Norse presence, although this time, instead of our timeline, they would do a better job of making them Norse-Irish rather than Irish-Norse. Because in our timeline, the Norse rather assimilated into Ireland, but in this timeline, they're going to make the Irish assimilate into being Norsemen. So they would also grab Wales eventually, and possibly Scotland, but the Scots would be the hardest to crack, much like in our timeline, and might remain the same as in our timeline. Although they would also eventually get Iceland and Greenland to be part of the North Sea Empire, and being richer than our timeline, Scandinavian kingdoms, and with the right persuaders, might be able to make a better financed run at Vinland. Canute was also tied to the Piasts of Poland by marriage, and the trade relations between medieval Poland and medieval Denmark go back a very, very long time. So I imagine that this North Sea Empire would be involved heavily in Polish affairs, especially in the Piast kingdom fragments as in our timeline. So this would also open the door to much more trade and also military support. Also, Canute had good favor with the Holy Roman Emperor, so this would also build more connections. The North Sea Empire would almost certainly have interest as far as Novgorod or even the Russian Arctic, further expanding their trade circle and influence, which would be raking in a lot of possibilities. And due to this connection that was built by Hatha Canute, there would be a language connection. So in large sections of northern and eastern England, a lot of people spoke a form of English, having been influenced by Norse as they were all descended essentially from Vikings. So if the North Sea Empire survived into the 1600s, then I think there could be a much more unified Anglo-Danish language, or at least two languages that are as similar as Danish and Norwegian in our timeline. So we would have that very connected, either single language or two languages very similar. So as well as pooling from and incorporating Gaelic and Celtic languages and format into this language to create a Anglo-Danish language used by the North Sea Empire. So what does this mean? This means that there would be a lot of prosperity being raked in by their sphere of influences, their trade ports, and their connection in political, social, and language prospects. So the large extent and access to the many different resources, trading ports, regions, hubs, and routes, the North Sea Empire would be able to be, with some commonality of language and political connection, an alternative to the Hanseatic League as well. So instead of the Hanseatic League, we would have this North Sea Empire, who was a prosperous powerhouse at the time. Think of the Great Northern War with Sweden and how it was a powerhouse, but all of this huge chunk of the North Sea. So this would allow for many more unions and trades to be an option as ways of income to open up the rulers of the North Sea Empire. So imagine that we have Poland, Brittany, Flanders, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, possibly even Finland, Greenland, Iceland, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and England all connected under one empire. Think of what that could spell for military strength and prosperity reasons. So due to this, the Northern Europe trade would be dominated, and much like the Hanseatic League, would allow for the prosperity of the empire to flourish. And this could mean for a lot of luxury, of access, and large interest. So this could spell a lot of things. But for example, there would be a lot of struggles of survival, because an empire that big would be very hard to keep together for even a small amount of time. With the threats of the Normans to the south, much as in our timeline, and the arduous problems of the time it takes to cross the North Sea, and the high chances of sinking ships of that era, makes it hard to control an oversea empire of any size. However, if North Sea kings had still ruled England, but had no land in Scandinavia, which I highly doubt, they could have focused all their attention on the British Isles and cemented their rule, and maybe even snagged the Shetlands or Faroe Islands. And if this went on slowly, and the new Anglo-Norse had pushed their way into Scotland and created a 600-year early Great Britain, they could have invaded Ireland and perhaps even try and teach the Normans a lesson or two. Because if we had a solidified union, much as the Great Britain, except 600 years early, this could mean a military powerhouse. So instead of having the Normans dominating the royal houses of England and having the English rulers speaking French, we would have Norse-speaking English rulers kicking the butt of the Normans, possibly. The Normans try to come over as in our timeline, but they get pushed back. And possibly they could even push into the Norman land and teach them a lesson, maybe even assimilate them. Who knows with that kind of strength. However, let's talk honestly, because this kind of empire, there's gonna be a lot of problems. Canute himself was much happier ruling in just England rather than in Denmark. So even if the joint English-Danish Empire would have survived a bit longer down the road, it would ultimately be cut in at least two, much the same as in our timeline. So there would be the English Isles, and there would be the Nordic countries cut in two. The empire would be split, kind of like the Roman Empire being split between East and West. There would be simply that this North Sea Empire did not have the administration or decentralization needed. So the state apparatus and political culture that is necessary to have this kind of decentralized kingdom in Scandinavia just wasn't there at the time. Even later in the late Middle Ages, with the Kalmar Union, it did not go smoothly at all, especially in Sweden, as I talked about in my Gustav video, which I will link down below, as well with the Canute video, talking about how the Swedish left the Kalmar Union. So this could be kind of a predecessor to the Kalmar Union, except I don't see it going much better, if better at all, compared to the Kalmar Union because of the unique peoples. So yes, the Norse people have a lot in common between countries, but there would be still huge differences. So the best option that I see happening for this timeline would be a Danish-dominated England in the stead of the Normans, as I said earlier. Instead of the French influencing it, it would be the Danish influencing it. And so this could have gone against Scotland, Wales, or the Kingdom of Man and Isles somewhat earlier than the Norman-French dynasty did, and they would have a Danish England instead of a Norman England. So maybe also there could be a Danish War of Succession, like a Nordic 100 Years War kind of thing, and this could also possibly take place. Also, honestly, I don't know if this Danish-English empire could successfully take over Denmark and recreate a North Sea empire if it wanted to. That's always an option if it were to do the split, as I said, that they could come back over and try to reconnect, although I don't know if they would have the strength. So that's kind of where I see this going in the realistic aspect, and that's also where I think this timeline would end. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this alternate history that I've come up with. I hope you enjoy What If Mondays. If you do, leave me a like. If you don't, go ahead and leave me a dislike. If you have a comment, a suggestion, a concern, or an idea of how this could go differently, go ahead and leave that for me down below in the comment section. Be sure to check me out on Facebook and Twitter, or you can email me, and also check out my Patreon. And as always, I hope you enjoyed, and this has been Shield Brother 6 with a What If Monday, and I'll catch y'all next time.